Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' base capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone's staying warm on this wonderful polar vortex afternoon. I'm pretty keen on this right now because it's just so cold, and it just like it was like overnight, and you know apparently we had a nice little warm spell, but it just snapped, and it's gonna get warm here later in the week apparently, and I'm all for that. But I've just been reading more about polar vortex, and it's really fascinating because it turns out that it's like when we feel it, it's completely different than it is in Europe or in I guess North Korea or Siberia. It's not the same all over the place, obviously, and a lot of it's influenced by the jet stream, and a lot of it's influenced by ground temperature and air pressure and the temperature of the air in the stratosphere and how much energy it's storing up as it's contending with high pressure regions that are kind of containing it. And this stuff is quite fascinating actually, because it in a sense it's like the tip of the flame. It's where some of the most intense activity in our atmosphere is occurring right now. And it's just dumping cold air back down on us. And I realize that using a flame as an analogy is kind of awkward, but in terms of the way the gases are interacting, there are cold regions and there are, you know, there are different levels to our atmosphere. And so all of these things, they interact with each other in different ways, but polar vortex itself, and that's actually a really interesting name too, because it kind of describes this, I think it describes a more violent activity than it really is. But when I look at the satellite imaging or temperature thermographic imaging, it looks like more like a flame to me than it does, you know, water or some kind of fluid. It looks like it's on fire. It's alive. It's incredible to look at.
Like the activity is really crazy when you can see it from the satellite imagery and get the actual scale of it.
You know, it reminds me that this planet is so much bigger than we think it is. Like, it's covering a giant, like, you know, cap of the Earth that nobody really occupies for the most part, and then it just reaches down into North America and freezes the place overnight. I'm sure that there's something similar going on in Antarctica. I know that the Larsen B ice shelf, it like has disintegrated over the past couple of months, and now it's broken and in the water, like officially. So there's something crazy going on.
Well, and that's kind of where it's hard to tell if the cycle was going to happen and human activity exacerbated it, or if it was not 100%, but mostly human caused. And that's kind of like, obviously it's not going to be possible for scientists to figure it out in real time, and they'll have to do retrospective analysis. But since it's like the timing makes it want to seem like, or it makes it very likely that it's caused by carbon emissions. But I think that ends up being like, that is a safer scenario in people's minds, because if that's the case, then we can do something about it. Whereas if it's a natural cycle and it's out of our control, that's actually much more like terrifying. If we, at least if it's global warming or climate change
Or
we
human
can,
induced.
right, then there's like the possibility that we can do something about it. But if it's just a natural cycle,
If this is the result of gravitational interaction between our sun, Jupiter, Saturn, and some
in the
primordial
moon,
black hole that just happened to fly through our solar system, and it pulled on that giant core of whatever it is that's spinning around outside of between the iron core and the mantle, because there's that giant structure they don't really know what it is that's kind of floating around. If it's pulling on that, and that's causing all of this crap, and we can't do anything about that because that's like a
right,
continent-sized structure.
yeah. Which again, that's definitely possible. And if that's the case, then there's like fuck all we can do about it. And that's like way more terrifying. So I think, then there's the people who don't want to believe that it's man-made, then rely on a deity to then come in and affect it, because they're like the religious zealot type that only read the Bible.
Well, obviously,
And
it's a space titan that's hatching inside of our planet.
yeah, eternal, a la Eternals.
Oh man,
Yeah, that movie was so bad. Oof.
I couldn't figure out
I
why I was supposed to care about anybody in that movie.
Yeah, I'm just like continuously baffled about how bad that movie was, in the sense of, it's not, I don't really feel like this is a tangent, in that obviously the giant space titan being birthed in the ocean or out of the planet, that's what the story's about, where it's like, yeah, if
That's some preposterous, like,
oh man, the whole storyline is useless, and that's kind of where the people that like want to believe in an interventionalist sky titan that also will not get involved when the logic, or the lack of logic that it takes for those people to exist, is why we end up with those types of movies. I think there's a 1-to-1 correlation, and that's, I'm looking at,
if they'd have loaded that cast up with all A-list, like all Angelina Jolie level actors and actresses, it would have made sense, because it'd been like, well, what are we going to do with all these people? We can't really put them in their own movie. We don't have enough characters, but we can put them all in this giant group flick that nobody's really going to watch, but it's really important in the whole pantheon. That would have made sense. But this story doesn't really.
but even then, it's not
The story doesn't matter.
Itself.
Yeah, the story
it's
doesn't
not.
even fit into the larger MCU.
So, I just don't understand the logic behind that film, in that it's not like they set out to fail, but it's almost as if they made every single mistake that they possibly could have, and then we're like, yeah, we'll just go with it because we're the MCU, and people will just watch it regardless. That's kind of what it felt like. I'm just really glad I didn't pay money to watch that film, because I would have been very upset. I can at least take it in stride because I didn't pay to watch it. But if I had paid even $1 to watch that film, I would have been really upset. But there's like a creativity gap that is being filled with shiny CGI and actors and actresses that are past their prime, and that's where I'm like, Disney and the MCU tried to just give us an empty, hollow shell of a film and just let us consume it and eat it up as if it's the same level of quality as everything else. And they're putting these things out there and trying to make it seem as if there's no discernible difference between the quality. And then it's on the audience to then figure out, oh, is this actually good? So then you get people who are like, oh, Spider-Man No Way Home should get an Oscar. No, 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 the fuck it shouldn't. It was an okay film. It wasn't great. And that's where, because we're so starved for quality content, people will look at No Way Home and just gush over it, mainly because it made like $2 billion, but then they'll act like that movie is like a great, it's not a 10 out of 10 film. It's just not. And that's where I'm like, if people are honest with themselves, it's a 7.5. It's not a fucking, it's not even an 8. They relied too heavy on nostalgia. The plot doesn't make sense at certain points. The motivations don't make sense at certain points. There's a lot of problems with that film, but because we were so starved for quality content, the people that are not discerning will say that that movie's a 10 and lament that it should have been nominated for an Oscar. And it's like,
So I've been watching Peacemaker quite a bit. Like I've watched all of the available episodes several times. On their own, repeated, and then watched a sequence. And that has to be the most interesting and fun DC superhero story. And I don't think it exists in the same universe as it exists in one of the universes, of course, but I don't think it's the same one that like the Titans exist in, or the one that Arrow. I don't think it's part of the Arrowverse. I don't feel like it's part of the Arrowverse.
oh no, definitely not.
And it's got its own charm to it. It's and obviously James Gunn is doing really well with the writing and the direction of the series, but that's the most. It's the most fun.
For sure, they won't say for sure if it's in a different universe.
Yeah.
Than the Snyder one, but I think that's largely because he wanted to do a Starro taking over Superman plot line, and they wouldn't let him.
That would have been really good.
So that's where they will allude to Bloodsport having put Superman in the hospital.
Starro Man would have been an awesome story.
Yeah,
holy
I think
crap!
That would have been way better than the one we got, and that's where it's like, there's definitely some studio executive influence in every Warner Brother property, but specifically in the films that are around or Batman adjacent, and you can always tell that there's some studio influence in the decision making, and that's why we get these 7 out of 10 films that something's off, and it's almost always executive influence.
Well, the second Suicide Squad movie was terrible.
It's
where terrible. But Peacemaker was interesting. I'm really glad that we're getting this expansion of his story, because he's actually a complicated character.
Well, and it's where I wouldn't go so far with my perspective as to say it's terrible. Just it wasn't great, and that's kind of where I'm like,
I'm being
the things that made it have poor impact, I think, were probably because he couldn't do the Superman Starro storyline and just had to do Starro only. Where it's like, I know he wanted to do Starro, but the impact of the storyline and the impact of the character, something just wasn't there. And it wasn't by the end of the movie, you feel like you kind of wasted your time because there was nothing compelling to hold on to. And I think that's where when you go into a Suicide Squad property, it's obviously meant to be like, oh, who's going to die?
How
and
are they
that's
going to
kind of
die?
where, and that's it's who and who's going to die and how are they going to die, and that's really it as far as the expectations go. That's all the expectation you're really supposed to have. But then when they try to make it elevate it into something else, there has to be real motivation there. Otherwise, like it just falls flat in the same way that the first one did. Um, and that's kind of where like the Task Force X stuff that they've done on CW and in the like they did Suicide Squad Hell to Pay in the animated universe. For whatever reason, they're just able to pull off better storylines than the movie. But I think it's because WB gives them more leeway with the intellectual property. And that's the issue is like WB will wrap people's hands down to like Gotham not being able to have Batman in the suit until the very last episode. And even then it was like for a second or Superman in Smallville not being able to wear the suit until the very last episode. But I think they wanted, there was an aspect of them wanting to do that, but I'm sure that WB had some influence on that as well. So you can just see when something ends up out of balance and out of whack because
how long do they have to wring the origin story? How much time has to be spent getting the origin story so that everyone is they've milked it for everything it's worth. Every event that leads up to the moment that they don the costume and assume the mantle. How many episodes are there really? Can we really draw out of that whole journey before? I think that's what's happening. Like, do we need that many origin stories? Do we need that many interpretations of how Clark gets from Clark to Superman or Super Clark or whatever?
Well, and this is where I think the Invincible storyline is really good about just continuously moving itself forward. Like it ran for a long time in print, but even the way that the animated series is moving, it's like you can tell they don't spend a ton of time looking backwards as a plot device, and I feel like you can only notice it once you realize how many other stories lean on looking backwards as a plot device, and then they get stuck in it, and even down to like Spider-Man finally getting out of the Uncle Ben loop and then them pulling back all of the other Spider-Men just to make it this like nostalgia infinite loop effect where you're like, okay, this is regressive, emotionally stunted, and it's the sign of someone who never grew out of teenager mindset. And that's like what the character starts off as, but it's meant to evolve into a grown man. But the studios aren't letting that happen. And by proxy, I think the audience is mentally getting stunted. And it's like, with these fucking reboots, man, everything keeps getting rebooted every goddamn 10 years, and then the character never fucking evolves. And that's where
Bart Simpson-itis.
Oh my God.
They can never grow up. I mean, at some point Peter Parker is a man in the whole storyline. There are stories where Peter is an adult. They're actually interesting. They appeal to young adults. They're no longer kids' stories. They're complicated.
They won't let the audience get there mentally. And I feel like it's something that ends up affecting all other forms of media, because then studios have to bend to that mentality if they feel like they need, or if they want to sell tickets, then they have to appeal to that specific audience, because that's the one that's proven that they'll show up to a fucking movie theater in the middle of a goddamn pandemic if you appeal to them. And that's like the most dangerous and regressive thing that I think has happened in film in the like, I never thought I would be this person saying like comic book movies need to be stopped, but they don't need to be ended so much as like the way that film studios have come to look at them as cash cows comes at the expense of the audience then not ever being able to grow out of a certain expectation of formula, so much so that once we hit like the first Avengers film, every Marvel movie was just a clone of that film with like slightly different beats. And I mean, the beat placement was the same, but what would occur at the beats would just be slightly different, to the point where now, as soon as all the characters are introduced in a Marvel property, I know who the villain is because of the way that they set up their formula, and they just don't break from it anymore. It's like there's no mystery involved because it's so formulaic that you know, oh, if this person's a tangential friend that they come to for help in the first act, and then that person's not present in the second act, that's the villain.
You know, that's actually one of the things that I appreciate the most about the X-Men series, even though they're pretty bad in some regards, is that at any moment the bad guy could get mad at everyone they're at and switch sides or become an alternate, aggressive force within the story. At any moment they could also decide like, oh, you're actually just in this for yourself. We'll screw you too then. And and so, and at any moment they could also align with each other against a common foe. So there's so much more fluidity to it that you couldn't always trust that the bad guy is the bad guy. Magneto starts out as the bad guy, but by the end of the whole story, Magneto is one of the good guys. And then they all get old. Like Logan gets old. Eventually, Logan dies. Eventually, the professor is killed. You know, like in that story universe, people they're forced to face mortality, and characters in that whole story universe drop like flies. Every movie, you see someone that you care about or some character that they've built up as part of the story, just, they get waxed, and that's the end of it. I think that there's a lot more. Also, Wolverine just increases the whole like brutality factor because of the way that his character engages people. Whereas with like a plasma blast out of the Iron Man costume, it's a lot easier to stomach that as like, oh yeah, they're just getting vaporized or something.
Yeah, and even like those, what was it? Days of Future Past is probably the worst out of all those films, but it wasn't. Apocalypse was pretty bad too.
Apocalypse is worse than Days of Future Past.
Yeah, but even those aren't terrible. Like when I went back and watched Apocalypse, knowing it was Oscar Isaac, I had a lot more appreciation for Apocalypse, and the character design didn't bother me that much the second time. For whatever reason, the first time it was just horrible to look at, but the second time it like made more sense, even though it wasn't great.
That's the only time I've seen a visualization of what I've always imagined Magneto's, like the full expression of his ability to attack while defending himself. That swirling vortex of steel and concrete and dirt. That was pretty cool. I think X-Men is a really challenging universe to bring to the screen because there's such a firm visualization in so many people's minds of what it is. Whereas I don't think that the Avengers quite got... They came later in the television cartoon wave. Like, I don't remember seeing Avengers appearing as with as much force as X-Men appeared on Saturday morning. So
that was like a very brief window, and it feels like it was a longer window than it was for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, it was only like 4 seasons.
I mean, and even then,
They weren't even full seasons.
and if you go back and watch, they like changed the animation style and they reset the storyline. So by season 4 and 5, it's a completely different show than in a season 1. The tone's completely different. And that's when they started to go off air. I think they might have even...
They tried to reboot it several times. One with like, it was like Wolverine and the X-Men was its own series. And then there was like X-Men Extreme.
But they would play it at like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And that's when it started to go away, when you're like, I would try to get up and watch it before school. And I'm like, man, this is fucking stupid. I just remember thinking like, why would they do this to anybody at the time? It's like they were trying to get it off the air. But just putting it at the most inopportune times for a person to watch it.
Yeah. I think at a certain point, all of these things are not, they're meant to be consumed by like the direct to video crowd who like buys DVDs, and they just end up on television because it's like a contractual obligation that these things have to be distributed through some kind of network of Saturday morning cartoons. I think that's how a lot of cartoons actually end up on the air. Like they might get purchased, or they might get produced, and then the studio is sitting there thinking like, fuck, what do we do with this thing now?
And it's really weird. It's like I remember
it's like twofold. People want out of their contract, and then the studio has to do something with it because they put money into it.
Well, and this is like the changing times. I remember at some point Saturday morning cartoons started to go away, and they started getting replaced with like live action stuff, but it was for like both teenagers and adults. And then it was this middle of the road stuff where you're like, I'd rather be watching X-Men. So it was like they were trying to please a crowd and tell them what they wanted, not knowing like, hey, we actually just wanted X-Men, which is how you get adults going back and watching the old X-Men series, because that original iteration was fucking awesome until they kept trying to like change it with studio influence. It's like all they had to do was follow the fucking source material.
Isn't that the case always? If they'd have just followed the source material, they would have avoided so many problems.
Yeah.
I think that's actually one of those things that what is it? Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau got a little flack for, was with the way they brought Cad Bane to the screen. There were complaints that he didn't look like he did in the Clone Wars animation.
Well, and then you put them next to each other and they're not far off.
No, they're really fucking close. Like, they're so close that it's like, are these people serious? Like, are they just looking for reasons to complete? We got Cad Bane in a live action, and they finally killed him. It took like a decade of TV to kill this character. That's hardcore. The dude went toe to toe with Obi-Wan multiple times and lived. Not just lived, like walked away laughing about it. The guy was hardcore. They finally killed him. That's a big deal.
I don't know. I just like, I am realizing, I guess there are parts of Star Wars that I like, but I was never just a all-out Star Wars fan, because once I started watching Book of Boba Fett, I'm like, I can't do this. The pacing, the story, I can't keep on watching this particular storyline, and I just stopped watching it. So I'm like, I'm not going to talk shit about it, but it's just not for me. This is like for someone who just loves Star Wars and doesn't want to like think about anything and just turn off their brain, and then it's Star Wars. And it's where I'm like, I guess I'm not that person. I mean, I never thought I was, but it was painfully obvious when I couldn't watch Book of Boba Fett. I'm like, I'm not that person, definitely.
Well, the last half of this 7 episode season, chapter, book, whatever it is, addition to the Star Wars anthology, the last half of it's basically a Mandalorian story. So that was actually kind of cool. Like, yay, less of this guy remembering how to be himself, and more stories of Mando, the guy that actually gets shit done. Awesome. I got a kind of kick out of it. The Shan Fang, whatever, the bounty hunter, or the assassin that is in this story. She was the voice of Mulan, like OG animated movie Mulan. So they got like one of their former Disney princesses to do live action in this. She's also in Stargate and like a bunch of other stuff. Like she's like all over some like Sci-Fi Channel productions. I think it's interesting because up until this whole story, I really just kind of relegated Boba Fett to this role of like, yeah, he's just a clone, like a malformed clone that instead of being one of the clone army, he was, got sucked into a life of bounty hunting and revenge. That really wasn't that interesting to me. But I'm definitely interested in that whole story universe because it's a fairly well evolved Western with spaceships. And so on some level, you're right. Like there isn't much thought to it. You don't really have to think about it because it's the Wild West.
And I was never a huge Wild West fan.
Yeah.
So I'm not under the impression that it's not a Western, but I never really liked Westerns. So
what I like,
pretty consistent still.
What I appreciate about it is the spaceships. Really, I get a kick out of the spaceships. I want to see the spaceships. The blaster fights, that's okay, I guess. The armor doesn't really matter anymore. The corruption.
Well, and I get that too, but the spaceship design that has been on those, like, I don't like the Mandalorian spaceship, and I don't like the fucking Boba Fett slave shit, like Slave One.
Yeah,
I don't like that design either.
Yeah.
That's where I'm like, the name or the design, obviously, Fire Spray. Okay, yeah, that's the original name. The ship design, I still don't like it. And that's where there are these things like the X-Wing or Millennium Falcon. I really love those designs, but that's about.
They can't really. They've exploited those designs to the limit.
The Imperial TIE Fighter, I also really like that design. But there's like a lot of stuff that I just aesthetically, I'm like, this isn't for me. Even the, but it's quintessential Star Wars, and that's where if somebody's a Star Wars fan, this should be what they like. But the ones that claim to be Star Wars fans, I don't like this. So it's really.
I think it's funny that half of the ships that they designed for that universe are like the equivalent of semi trucks or space buses. They're not even nice enough.
Look like it.
Yeah, they're not even nice enough to be like first class airlines or as passenger transport. They're just giant buses or a boat, a big ass space boat.
Yeah, I saw something posted today about that design is intentional because only entities that have amassed a large amount of resources are going to be able to make vehicles. They're all going to look very uniform, and like there's not a whole lot of uniqueness to the design in the universe intentionally because it's like, well, the Empire would be the only entity able to mass produce these vehicles, or like the Rebels, their shit's gonna look
like it's thrown together.
Yeah, like hacked together. So those design aesthetics were there intentionally, but that's where it's also meant to be a long time ago.
Yeah,
and it's not in the future.
No, it's not Star Trek.
No, and I think it's hard for people to remember that shit. It's like it's supposed to be the long, long past, not the future. And that's just, I think that's always lost So in that, I'm like more. I'm more interested in, I guess, future stories,
Yeah.
and then because it feels like Star Wars has gotten stuck in a regressive mindset because of exploiting every single property and penny out of it can.
Let's see what.
And that's fine. I just don't. That's not for me.
Yeah.
Um, and that's where I just wish people would not have to then go after. Like, you don't see me attacking Book of Boba Fett because I stopped watching it. Like, I don't need that show to go off the air because it's not my favorite show. There are plenty of people who enjoy it.
The people
so
who
I'll
are
let
making
them
the biggest
enjoy
complaints
it.
are the ones who think they like it.
Yeah.
So, are you up to speed on all of the changes in Discovery?
No, I don't think of. I think the last episode I watched was episode 8, and it was like whenever the AI got imposter syndrome, I'm like, I'm done. I'm tapping out.
Yeah, it's
I'm
no
done.
longer it's no longer episodic. It's definitely a story arc now. They've introduced a character, it's unknown species 10C, and this species has technology that's so advanced that they're able to create like essentially a black hole. I don't think anything even exists like that in Star Wars.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think Star Wars has the framework for that kind of like cosmic or species, some kind of species that actually has that kind of power. Because we're supposed to see like, the Force as the all binding, uniting thing, and there's obviously they have like weird Force deities, but not beings that exist on the normal plane of existence type stuff. Sometimes I think Star Trek is pushing it really hard. Like they're really trying to create they're trying to re-solidify their role within science fiction. But I think that a lot of the time they end up what they're doing now is more like they're trying to make a bunch of movies instead of doing episodic Star Trek, which is what I would prefer they do. But I don't know. It's hard to tell because they're not doing what I hope they do, and so part of me is kind of confused by it. But I'm kind of with you on the whole, like, the ship with feelings is kind of, that's too much for me. I'm sure somebody out there really likes it though.
Yeah, it's for somebody. It's not for me.
I wonder how many of these things are like written by committee now, like.
Yeah,
Because I know that characters have their own teams to create the character and maintain continuity and derive interaction with other characters and scenes. But how much of the actual episodes are derived by committee? It's like, oh, we can't do that. In this past episode, these things happen, so they can't actually be doing these things or some shit.
a good question.
Because I think that would be the kind of thing that would limit a story. Those would be the big limiting factors. Those wouldn't even be variables. Variables would make the stories interesting.
And that feels like what happened with Eternals, and it's not even about diversity, because people will say, oh, they just wanted to make a film where it's like all diverse representation. Like, no, that's mostly MCU already. That's not even an issue. So much as it seemed like they had these characters and they're like, how can we make toys around these characters? What's the plot that would allow us to make the most number of toys? And that's what Eternals felt like, more than like, how can we make this plot relevant to the rest of the actual MCU and relevant to modern times? Because it was neither. It was not relevant to MCU or modernity. And that's where, like, it's really easy to make an ethical stand about the Holocaust. Good job. Great. Good job, MCU. The Holocaust was bad. Of course. No fucking shit. But that's where, that's like as far as they would go. When you have gay people of color parenting a kid, and you're not going to make social commentary about either one of those groups' plights? Okay. All right. I'm just going to act like that didn't happen. Including them is enough. Making commentary on their plight in modern times, they're not going to go that far. So I look at those types of things where then you see, like, in Loki, Loki coming out is like a passing reference to potentially having had relations with other princes or something. It wasn't even like really that explicit, and then people made it out to seem as if, oh, MCU representation. It's like, well, they did all that only to have him go into a heterosexual relationship basically with himself.
Well, in Peacemaker, early on in the series, they show him in bed with a woman that he had previously detained and his cohort Vigilante. And then later in the series, his dad's like yelling at him about how he's unpure, about, you know,
because he slept with dudes too.
Slept with women who were unclean and with men. And so I think the superhero story is a perfect avenue for these kinds of this kind of character development, and to reveal that, hey, just because, you know, I think what is it, like body dysmorphia, like Peacemaker's obviously like built like a football player, but inside he's clearly not. Like, he's always at odds with himself. And I think that's one of those things that Loki is very successful at exploring, because he's a shapeshifter. He can become all these other things to explore whatever they need him to. And ultimately it's these are facets of his own personality.
And I would it's, on the one hand, people will be like, well, these aren't meant to be political. Actually, they are. That they are very much meant to be political when they were written in the first place. And it's not as simple as like Professor X represents Malcolm or Martin Luther King, and Magneto represents It's not that simple, and that's like a retroactive imposition that was not necessarily real. But at the same time, you have like,
I'm pretty sure Magneto was designed to create like a character who had been traumatized by Nazis.
Not at first. That wasn't even part of the character at first. He was like I think he was a Roma at first. And it was like even the Holocaust storyline wasn't there at first. And that was included later, I think in the 80s, but it wasn't something that was originally part of the character. But that doesn't mean they didn't have other political, like, commentary. Because even I think the first X-Men story is like they're stopping like a nuclear missile launch or some shit. It's like they'll make commentary about, you know, nuclear war.
That's the Days of Future Past storyline. Right.
That's the throwback.
Yeah.
Which is like based on the X-Men #1.
Yeah.
Like that part of it. So it's like, yeah, if you're talking about using mutated people to stop a nuclear launch, that's definitely political commentary. And the idea that it's just pure escapism for the sake of fiction is like, a narrative that is used by people who want to silence political commentary if they disagree with it, and they'll use these like false reconstructions to make it seem like, oh yeah, no, people just started including these woke narratives to appease the SJWs. Like, no, it's always been political commentary at some point. Even the fucking Ubermensch is like reference to a philosophical framework.
The Ubermensch was like big within Hitler's philosophy. That's one of those things that, like, it's very clear that he really dug some Nietzsche.
Right, but when you realize like the creators of Superman were Jewish, then it's obviously meant as a counterpoint to, like, I mean, even the timing is like not exact. Like, it slightly precedes the Holocaust, or not the Holocaust, but definitely the Holocaust. But as far as like the rise of Nazism, the Ubermensch Action Comics is like, it's not even a direct response, but it's like a more Jewish empowerment, like through the use of the Ubermensch as a reclaimed concept.
Superman's a Moses story, isn't it? For the most part.
Yep, and that's also like the reason it is a Moses story and not a Jesus story is because the creators were Jewish, not Christian. So it's these, like, the first Superman Action Comics was in 1938. So it's like right before.
I mean, he also shows up in a basket wrapped up in a blanket from his homeland or something like that.
Yeah, like, so it's definitely a Moses story, but it's like it's pre World War II, but like obviously post rise of Nazism, and that's where it's like it's not a direct response necessarily to Hitler, but there are like the reclaiming of the Ubermensch is part of that like Jewish response of creating their identity as not being inferior as this other fucking crazy person has made it seem like. And that's where that aspect is totally lost when then you try to make Superman about truth, justice, and the American way. Like, no, it's actually about Jewish empowerment. If we're going to get like specific and technical, it's 100% about Jewish empowerment in the face of rising Nazi threat.
Jewish empowerment in the face of rising Nazi threat is the American way, apparently.
Well, it was.
It was
for a small window. Until we started taking their scientists and putting them in high positions of authority. So
that's all. Yeah, apparently that's also the American way. In the last 5 years, I believe, the number of satellites has gone up like astronomically. We've got some like 5,000, I think, objects that are now visible with the naked eye, and it's only gonna increase within the next 3 years. They expect it to be 10,000 objects that we can see with the naked eye, and all of these things are going to impact terrestrial optical astronomy, star photography, astronomical photography. It'll also impact terrestrial-based radio astronomy. All of these things are going to be impacted, just so you know, a select few people can have internet in their car. And with this, of course, you know, good old Elon thinks he can launch satellites into space at $1 million per launch because they're getting ready to move forward with Starship, the stainless steel reusable rocket platform. And, I think, yay, cool. This would be really cool if that actually worked, sort of, except for the whole, can't see outer space anymore because there's a glowing object flying in front of your telescope. And I realize not everyone's going to, go out and get a telescope and start stargazing just so they can watch satellites. But, all of our most significant advances in astronomy so far have been based on the ground, like the neutrino telescope in Japan and telescopes that they use to scan the cosmos. There's no way we can supply a device in outer space with enough electricity to accomplish what that thing does. Also because each one of those neutrino cameras are essentially the size of a skyscraper built inside of a mountain. We can't assemble that in space and power it. We only have so many opportunities, I think, to do this stuff right. And man, internet in space, Mars colonies, new space station. We're going to get a new space station soon because, they can't figure out how to use this one that they've already got up there. I think it'd be a good tourist trap, but that also means allowing space tourism, which I think is inevitable at this point because there are a bunch of people that are clearly itching to go up into space and develop cancer.
Yeah, I mean, technically, it hasn't already started.
Yeah, well,
it's just not.
It's not attainable to the average person.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's only for rich people.
Maybe we should encourage
Which is
people
what
to go get cancer.
Well, I was gonna say that's probably all it'll ever be. Like, I can't imagine humans.
Royal Caribbean in space.
Right.
Norwegian
Well, it's like
cruise line in space. You're definitely gonna get COVID.
there's no way we get that far without like fucking ourselves up in the process. It's just this group of people is too selfish to get that far.
I mean, I can't even really imagine how many generations of technology are going to be necessary before humans can safely occupy space.
Mm-hmm.
Like the kind of electromagnetic shielding that our planet provides us is incredible. A planet is required to protect us from space. Like, what kind of graviton field emitting dynamo do we have to create that kind of electromagnetic field to protect us from space? And how dangerous is it going to be, working near that thing?
Well, and then we have to have a reason to go there, or we have to have technology that's good enough to make that other technology useful to where we're going somewhere else. Because it's like, well, we're just going to go survey Jupiter.
I don't know, man. I just envisioned the shielding technology. I didn't even think about the spaceship or the actual power requirements.
Or what is used for.
Yeah,
and that's what I mean.
Yeah,
like,
not even getting to the point of what is it good for. Like, what do we actually need this for? We're going to go to Neptune and harvest diamonds from the rain and use them in supercomputers because Neptunian diamonds are of the utmost quality. You will never find a more brilliant diamond anywhere in the cosmos. De Beers, you can send a check to Exceptional Randos, care of Exceptional Randos.
well, and that's where I'm like, not even the discussion about creativity earlier is not lost in that. What are we using this technology for at scale? Because when you really look at it, it's not really anything useful most of the time. And then that is a cycle that keeps us perpetually creating more and more useless technology because for whatever reason the market rewards it, whether organically or because of a small group of influencers with a large amount of capital. Whatever the reason, the market rewarding all of these empty and useless creations makes it so that the market produces even more useless creations, and nothing ever actually useful is like, if you can sell the idea or the concept, you don't actually have to build it. And we're at that point where people are like more content selling and profiting off of ideas rather than actually making anything of use. And that's where I'm like, I'm trying,
I wouldn't be surprised if any of the fusion reaction experiments that are running concurrently all over the world right now, I wouldn't be surprised if the ones that have been able to sustain stable fusion for, a few minutes at a time and achieve success within the framework of their experiments, if that device actually generates the kind of electromagnetic field that was thinking about in terms of how do we protect humans in space from outer space itself. But in that case, if that's an engine for a spaceship, why aren't we testing it in space? Do we need to do the tests on Earth still? Do we even, is this
probably because of the power requirements and that it takes to...
So we're still at the power requirements. So until we have like some kind of incredible breakthrough in energy generation, well, that thing's supposed to be able to generate its own electricity after a while. It's supposed to be able to create a stable loop where it's generating copious amounts of fusion-based energy.
But to get it started,
they have to jumpstart it somehow. So that's why that has to start.
And it takes space too, and that's like, it's not even necessarily that the fuel source takes a ton of space so much as the machine to get that operation executed takes up space. Like the Large Hadron Collider,
that thing's huge.
Fucking, what is it, like 17 kilometers or something? It's something like,
it's a giant facility. It's a huge facility. And the atom smasher portion of it is even huger.
Yeah, and it's like to collide two particles.
So we need something large enough for the Hadron Collider and one of these fusion reactors, and that's just the engine system for this thing, the starter and the engine. And then we need a place to store the power and the fuel, because we got to give it helium-3 or something like that, and we got to give it hydrogen. So we got to store the fuel supply. And then what else? Now we have to develop some kind of structure that humans can occupy, so they're shielded from the radiation itself, but allows the radiation or the electromagnetic field to protect them from radiation. Bridge, living quarters, agricultural sections to grow food, because they've got to have their space peppers.
You're talking about a structure that's like multiple miles long.
Yeah,
and wide.
Already this thing,
which
we're talking about something that's huge.
Which, that's going to be possible at some point in some technological construct, but we're way away from that.
I'm thinking like it's like I want to say like 12 to 15 full-size professional football stadiums. That's how big I'm envisioning this thing. It's got 4 fusion reactors. I don't know, 4 is an arbitrary number. Probably only needs 3.
Well, that's like the.
That's a small city. This is like 5 or 5 to 8 luxury cruise liners in size already. Our spaceships now are so tiny. Like, to accomplish the kinds of things that we would actually need them to do, they'd have to be so gigantic. Even the starships in Star Trek are tiny. compared to what we would actually need, because we can't.
I feel like the ones in Dune,
those are probably
Lynch's
close.
Dune, yeah, because you see it like the freighters are big enough to carry
multiple
a bunch
spaceships.
of right.
Yeah, and then when the people are walking onto them, unlike our more recent one where you can actually kind of see humans, like in the Lynch Dune, they're just little dots.
Mm-hmm.
Although the Villeneuve Dune is still really good about the scale of space and how big things really are.
Right.
I think that the Lynch Dune is actually better because of the low resolution.
Mm-hmm. I just rewatched it, and they did a really good job with the effects that they had at the time, especially like the space folding.
Oh yeah, that's
Like-
incredible. It's like oil and lights and glitter and
Yeah.
smoke, and it's very clever. That's very clever.
Yeah, obviously, what was it, like 1984? So they just didn't have that great CGI, but they made do, and it's something that still like gets the point across.
I think that they're what is it? The shield, the combat shield that they use with Gurney and Paul.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the most underrated special effects wizardry moments in all of cinema. I saw this special effects breakdown on it, and apparently they had to have somebody code every surface to have an accurate reflection, or it would have to have an accurate diffusion of the object inside on the other side of the shield. And so they had to code every single polygon. And so that's actually really impressive, the whole bringing it together. And of course now we have advanced animation tools that can do all this stuff natively. You just tell it what to do and it can do it. But somebody had to program all of that. I think that's the kind of stuff that blurs the line between CGI and practical effects. Also, they didn't have the modern tools. The new shields are pretty sweet too, though. They look more like, they look like they're made out of fire.
Well, and it seems more in line with something that's like 10,000 years in the future. in our modern minds, I would imagine. Whereas the Dune, the Lynch Dune, looks like a sign of the times it was made in, rather than something that was in the future.
Yeah.
To a degree, because it's so blocky.
In neither of those films did they go to any great length to explain the technology, though, and I appreciated that.
No, it was just there. Which that I think that's usually the best way to approach technology, unless the technology is like the crux of the storyline.
Like Altered Carbon.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed that show too. That was a good story, but it was all way too centered around the longevity technology that they'd been blessed with.
Mm-hmm. What was it? I don't know if that's Canadian, but there's like a lot of good Canadian sci-fi where the technology is important, but they don't over-explain it. Like in Continuum, where the hero has like a suit that can be programmed to have different looks, but it's also, I think it's like bulletproof or something. So there's like,
oh yeah, and she could also like electrocute people with it too, like
right,
like a taser.
Yeah, there was like built-in stuff, but they don't go through painstaking effort to explain how that specific suit works. It's like, this company is like just really high, you know, produces all the high tech. So it's like you don't have to make a mental stretch to assume that they would make something like that in the future. So they set it up so that the world reinforces the technology rather than having to over-explain it.
What I really liked about that show, they were really clever about it. You know, after they implant the optical interface into her eyeballs, and the whole suit comes online and all that, and then next thing you know, they show her, the protagonist, like in contemporary, what, Vancouver. The suit would take over a cell phone. It would just control the cell phone, it seemed. And that way she could interact with normal technology. The suit did it all. She didn't actually have to know how to do anything.
Right.
And when she was looking for the signal to get her suit reconnected to the server, it found the inventor's home computer network and said, "Oh, this is home." It was all very well done. It was very fluid. Like the system itself was intelligently designed, such that it would always reconnect to itself. And so we don't have to fill in the blanks because it happens so fluidly that, oh yeah, that's just the way it works.
You seen Dark Matter?
Dark Matter's great.
Yeah, and that whole show is built around the technology of the blink drive. So they do explain it, but because the show is built around obtaining that device, that's why it's always so important to the plot that people get an explanation of like, oh, it needs to be calibrated and this device is slightly out of whack, and you know.
Plus they'd wiped their own memories out and they couldn't figure out.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was right. That was the other part of that.
So Dark Matter, that show, I really enjoyed watching it the first time because the first time I saw it, I couldn't help but draw a comparison to Firefly. It's like here's a group of obviously criminals who are willing to do whatever they need to do to make some money. Except the universe was much darker. The story universe was much darker, and the corporations had broader control. It seemed like, and not only that, but they were waging war with each other. It wasn't just like the colonists or the people out in the frontier versus the people in the inner planets. It wasn't the frontier versus the interior. It was corporations that existed across giant swaths of space. And the kind of internal corruption that was alluded to within the story is itself, that stuff was really intriguing. And at no point did I don't think that, I mean, I know that there was a spaceship and they were in space and they did have some space engagements, but for the most part, it was a very cerebral story that took place like, you know, face to face. And there were scenarios that, well, crap, how do you even deal with this kind of scenario? And they explored a lot of, there were things that clearly these are delivered by some mechanism of the future. Like this is only going to happen if you have a spaceship and you're involved in this kind of transportation. But on some level, it goes back to Firefly or space truckers, where they're just moving some cargo. They don't even know what they have, and they're going to get in trouble. And
you don't need to go far from that to make a good story.
Exactly,
that's like,
exactly.
You just need that as a crux. And as long as the characters are interesting, you can have a really interesting story built around that concept. And it's like a really good vehicle for a story, but the characters have to be well written.
Yeah. Well, it really helped that they all start off with amnesia.
Yeah.
Having had their minds wiped, now we have no expectations for who these people are. None. It's brilliant, in fact. It's the thing that I enjoyed the most about Kelvin Star Trek is that they wiped the board clean and were able to go in a different direction, and they got to play off of familiar story mechanisms. But with Dark Matter, I have none of those things. It's a complete blank slate. I have no idea what the ship is like, or what it even looks like, or if it's a ship or a space station. I don't even know what's going on. It could be a boat. And then, you know, as they reveal these little pieces one by one, and then the universe becomes, well, easier to see. They did a fantastic job. Even
Well,
though
and it turns out Altered Carbon was also produced in Vancouver, even though it's claimed as an American TV show. So
didn't it
I
take
was
place in
not
San
wrong.
Francisco?
Um,
I think it was supposed to take place in
I
San
think it
Francisco.
took, but it was produced in Vancouver.
Well, that makes sense.
So that's where I'm like, I can always tell when a sci-fi show is made in Canada because there's something, they treat it better than American studios, and you can just tell. And that's why I'm like, even though Altered Carbon is technically an American show, it was produced in Canada.
I think
And that's
Sliders
where-
was produced in Canada too.
That makes sense too, yeah. That was really good for the time.
Man, Sliders it holds up.
Still holds up, yeah.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that if I want a less irreverent version of Rick and Morty, Sliders is great. Because the characters aren't trying to be badass. They're just trying to get home.
Sliders is an American science fiction and television series produced in Vancouver. Why do they keep calling this shit American, even though it's produced? Because that's where I'm like, I get if it's an American production company, but if you produce it in Vancouver, it's fucking
They're still
Canadian.
hiring locals.
Yeah, it was filmed in Los Angeles, but produced in Canada. So this is where I'm like, man, I'm going to say Vancouver makes the best science fiction TV. Anybody else can try to prove me wrong, but I'm pretty sure the history's on my side in that.
Man, I wonder how many other science fiction shows have been produced in Canada and just we don't even realize it.
Yeah. I'm going to assume all the good ones. I'm just going to assume that from now on. Because
What is it about Vancouver that looks like the future?
Yeah.
Or it looks like sci-fi? That's, what this is actually telling me is that I need to visit Vancouver because I want to see a place that looks like it's straight out of science fiction. And if that's the place in
Star City
in the West, yeah, seriously, if that's the place in the West that looks like science fiction, I want to see this place because I really don't want Vegas to be the image of the future. Oh man, although I feel like Vegas is probably what like the major cities of Ferenginar look like. Ferenginar and maybe Ryza. Although for some reason I think Ryza looks more like a cruise ship.
Yeah, it's totally like brought to you by Carnival Cruises.
Yeah, Ryza has like 5 continents. It's got Carnival, Norwegian, Royal Caribbean.
That was such a weird episode where it's like Worf goes to Rise and then just totally Worfs out and stops all the fun and shuts down the weather machines, and it's like then he even realizes he went too far, and it's like, man, could have just stayed your ass on the ship, Worf.
Oh, poor
Fucking
Worf.
buzzkill.
Man, he's like the guy that they invented the holodeck for. Like, seriously. Doesn't play well with others. Like, only happy when beating people with cudgels or blades. How the hell did that guy even get into Starfleet? I mean, obviously he's super intelligent and very capable and has a very high aptitude and probably would have been like a good surgical candidate had he stayed on Earth. But there are a lot of people in Star Trek universe that when I rewatch older episodes or even new stuff, it's like, how the did this person get into Starfleet? How did they end up on a starship? Why aren't they working on like a space station or a, something less critical? Maybe my expectations for like the requirements to get into Starfleet are a little too much. And it's actually a lot easier to get into Starfleet than I thought it was. I'm serious. There's got to be like a much lower bar than I realized.
No, we were watching the season where they start locking down Earth because of the Dominion threat, and it's like, man, the Federation were some fascist fuckers. Like, they would lock shit down with the quickness, and that's where, considering we only see the Federation from the perspective of an officer, I feel like that is the big thing that Star Wars has been able to do that Star Trek needs to start doing is like, they almost got there with the Maquis, but like we just really need a full-on Maquis series that's like, okay, the Federation is the bad guy from their perspective. We need to explore this because we never really have had a chance to look at the Federation as anything but the good guy.
Yeah, even in Voyager, when the Maquis and the Federation have to work together to get home, it's like showing that they were just showing the Maquis is like stubborn and the Federation is as willing to compromise and work towards a common goal.
The civilized peacekeeping.
But even then, they were under duress. I'm going to say that being stuck in the Delta Quadrant, like 70 years at maximum warp from home is like, that's duress.
Oh, totally. Totally.
Having replicator rationing, that's duress. Straight up. Oh,
Helix's food.
Oh God, that's just torture. The idea that some random alien knows what tastes good to a bunch of humans from a different quadrant of the galaxy. Man, that's...
Yeah, and it's really crazy that those two show that Voyager and Deep Space Nine were on roughly at the same time, as they're completely different, just tones. It's like they're not the same. It's not the same audience at all.
I think Janeway was a good captain, though.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah.
Considering the kind of shit she had to deal with.
And then it's like you can tell that they were trying to do one thing, and then when you have Janeway not getting with Chakotay and then bringing in Seven of Nine, it's like clearly the show was at odds with the producers, or at least one of the producers. And you can start to see when a property is basically fighting with itself. And there's like inconsistent shit about it.
Wasn't there some issue with like the Cass character was gonna like physically mature and die in the story by the way they defined her character, and so they needed to bring somebody else in, and so they brought Jerry Russell in and put her in that skin suit.
Right. Yeah.
That just seemed like a attempt. It's like we're gonna try and grab a portion of an audience that doesn't really pay attention to us with this chick in a skin suit.
Yeah, I mean, and it put her at odds with Kate Milligrew, and that's where you can tell, like, whether it's them intentionally stoking tension between the actresses, or if there's just a producer that's misogynist and wants like, hey, we got to have somebody on the show to sell sex to the audience, like whatever it was.
We don't have a Deanna Troi, guys. We need to come up with our own Troi.
Even that is like to put a counselor onto a starship means that they still have problems when this is supposed to be a utopia. So right there was like some production decision that undermined the entire point of the series, but it seemed innocuous until you start to analyze it. It's like, how can they be in a utopia if they got to go to the counselor every week?
That's how you know that they've lowered the standards for Starfleet, because they have to go see a counselor because they get space-itis. They get stir crazy in their cabin because they don't actually know how to be isolated for those extended periods of time when the only interaction they have is with their coworkers, and half of the time they don't even interact with them. They're just interacting through a console. In many ways, we already have what is going on in Star Trek, except we still drive cars and can't go to Risa and don't have replicators or phasers or disruptors. Fortunately, because no one needs a fucking phaser to go hunting. And definitely nobody needs a disruptor for fucking anything. Nobody needs a disintegrator ray. Nobody needs to generate anti-chronoton fields or anti-proton fields or tetryon fields or tetryon beams. Can you imagine, like, just how, like, with the way people drive now, like, there's no way anyone in America is ready for a shuttlecraft. Like, no fucking way.
God, no. Jesus Christ. Even the self-driving stuff is not even close to being ready. So that's where regular humans aren't ready and self-driving autonomous vehicles aren't ready.
I don't trust Tesla's racist corporate culture to produce a self-driving car when our most advanced human identification systems can't identify black people.
Or they're intentionally misidentifying black people and making it seem as if they're not seen, so then it hits them. And that's where I'm like, yeah, maybe it's not reading them, or maybe they're making it so that they can start accidentally killing black people and blaming it on the fucking self-driving software. I'm not sure I trust Tesla not to do the latter because of the shit that I'm reading about their culture at their factory. I'm not so sure that they wouldn't be malicious enough to do that shit and then be like, oh, it's a joke. And then because they don't actually see black people as human beings, yeah, they'll fucking program that shit to kill people.
So we need to get a black person and Elon Musk to both dress up in sweatsuits with hoodies and put the hood on and walk in the same direction as a car in the middle of the road and see if and we'll have Kanye do it because Kanye's crazy. He'll do anything for some attention. So we'll have them both turn around at the same time. They'll both be in different lanes too, and we'll know. We'll know if Elon's willing to do something like this to prove that his cars aren't racist.
Well, and the only reason I say that is because every time I've seen a video of the self-driving cars like swerve hit somebody, I'm like, that's a black person. And it's like almost every single time. And it's like, if a black person is because they're wearing dark clothes, and that's what I'm like, okay, but it's still a human figure, so this thing should be able to pick up a human figure, even if it is dark. What's happening here? What's going on, Tesla?
The funny thing is that, like, with radar, radio waves, with LiDAR, with any of the technology that we have, they can identify an object in the middle of the road. They can identify numerous objects in the middle of the road. They map that shit with cameras too. They have optical sensors. There's no way they can't see some object in the middle of the road.
Unless black people's skin absorbs light at a different rate, which it does, so we're not sending back the same type of signals, which we're probably not. But then they're going to act like they can't do anything about it to compensate.
But shouldn't they
just avoid?
But they should avoid anything in the middle of the road anyways. It shouldn't matter what it is.
That's true.
They should stop if there's something that's not moving in the road.
It's not that it should avoid something in the middle of the road. It's if something's on the other side of the road, it has to navigate between those two things. So it's like naturally it should avoid things in the middle of the road, but if it has to swerve, then it has to be able to calculate how to swerve without also hitting something. Yeah. And that's where it's like both sides of the vehicle
I can already see how this is going to be legislated. All shoe manufacturers are going to start having to implant chips so that the cars can identify them. That's how they'll get us to wear chips. Is they'll put it in our shoes. The Nike Chip 10,000. Not only is it faster, but it also sends more data than previous generations of Nike chipped shoes. And everyone's going to love it too because they'll cost less because they'll be subsidized by Tesla dollars because of their carbon credits or some shit.
Yeah, man. I don't trust those people to make flying vehicles either. I mean, but Tesla or Elon's always been against it, and he's like, we should just build down and make things vertical and use the space that we have instead of flying vehicles. And he's like,
meanwhile,
then
I'm going to go to Mars.
That was right. That was his whole argument against flying vehicles, is to like make tunnels. But then you see he can't make the fucking tunnel the way he said he could. So it's like, meanwhile, the first flying car has been cleared to actually be commercial, and that's where it's, who would have thought that a flying car gets certified before Tesla's, or I guess Boring Company's tunnels get completed, or even get remotely close to functioning as originally claimed. Which, you know, people will complain about the flying car, like that it's not the Jetsons type. But it's definitely a start.
Man, Jetsons is so far in the future that we have lost all land on Earth.
That's true.
There's no land on the Earth that can be inhabited. It's all underwater. Like, that's why everyone lives in cloud cities, is because there's nothing down there except water. And you can't even get in the water because portions of it are like radioactive and shit. The story that I understand about the Jetsons is that a large object collided with the Earth. And so, you know, all manner of problems with something that collides with heavily populated areas that may or may not have, like, the ability to generate energy. Big toxic zones. But it's still way off in the future. It's so far in the future that we have floating cities. That we can get around in a vehicle that flies that's basically the size of a golf cart. A family of 4 and their dog and robot can travel around in a flying golf cart. That's like so stupid advanced. I mean, like unbelievably advanced. That's Star Trek advanced. The Jetsons might as well take place on an alternate Star Trek universe where the Earth is underwater and everyone lives in the clouds. I mean, they get their entire meal out of a pill. Like, straight up, that's the future. Like, a really weird future. Oh, man, what happens if you mistakenly eat 2, meal pills? Do you get, extra full? Do you have the sensation of having eaten 2 meals? Or do you get all the nutrients without all the filling sensation? Is it like taking drugs if that happens? You know, you go way past threshold and then next thing you know, you're experiencing, more of the meal?
Getting the pill sweats.
The pill sweats. If you really want
to... Instead of meat sweats.
if you want to feel like you're in the kitchen, you got to eat 3 of the steak pills. I'm serious. If you take 3 of them, you'll feel like you're there when it's cooking. But you gotta take them slowly, because if you do it all at once, it'll taste burnt.
So flat screen TVs, computer viruses, video chats, tanning beds, and home treadmills did not exist when the first Jetsons were created, even though those things existed in the Jetsons universe. So looking at
Dude, Jetsons was a
the
fucking like prophecy.
well, it's just the things that they used as amenities for the far future.
Cleaning robots.
Like the most of them have come to fruition and are accessible.
We have a cleaning robot, or we have cleaning
Yeah.
robots, the Roombas.
Mm-hmm.
Holy crap! It's not really a pill, but you can get all your daily nutrients in a thing, basically the
Shake.
size, in a shake. I suppose you could cram that into a pill, but it would be like the size of a brownie.
I mean, you can get all the vitamins, but not the nutrients in a pill.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I mean, currently, which I guess it probably wouldn't be that far off. But I imagine if it's in a pill size, it must be as dense as a fucking brick, right?
Oh man, you still have to drink like 12 ounces of water if you swallow that pill. You might as well get the shake. It could be like those foam dinosaurs you can get as
Can't be good on the intestines.
Oh man.
You never talk about George Jetson's constipation from all the pills. Like, yeah, there's no way that doesn't fuck up somebody's stomach.
I don't know. Maybe they
So-
figured it out. Maybe it's got like nanites inside that keep the intestinal tract clean. I mean, it's plausible that the Jetsons universe is rife with nanites and that they rely on all manner of technology. I mean, they've got golf carts that can take them to Saturn. Like, fuck, that's really advanced. Like going to Saturn is like a day trip. Like it's as easy as going to the mall. Fuck. I mean, it takes us like years to get anything to Saturn.
Is it like 3 months to Mars still?
I think so. But Mars is really close compared to Saturn.
Oh, it's still 7 months.
Oh. I bet they can get something to Mars in like 3 months if they have the right launch window and
Right, yeah.
And-
at the
and-
close fit.
and they don't have to transport humans. I bet if it's just like
Yeah.
a machine, they can get it there really quickly. I bet once humans are involved, it's going to be like a year to get to Mars because they can't accelerate them that fast. Or if they do, they can't decelerate them smoothly or something like that.
Start decelerating like months ahead of time.
The deceleration around Mars is they just fly straight to Mars and then loop around it like a dozen times, slowing down slowly. So by the time they actually land, they'll have experienced, I don't know, an extra 3 months of just deceleration. I think that should be the way they do it. They should just decelerate around the freaking planet. What do I know? I don't know anything about
Well, I mean, you have to get the right trajectory so that it doesn't slingshot, or if it's at the proper trajectory, like it'll have to be between slingshotting and then being too close to be pulled in. So that's actually a really, really difficult trajectory to hit when you're coming at a high speed.
Yeah.
So it's like a very thin line because you hit the wrong one, then you come around the other side of the planet and you fling off, which is how, I mean, that's how they get to Mars in some cases. Like they fly around the moon to pick up speed and then slingshot off. Like that's, some of the trajectories, like they're not all direct trips.
Yeah.
And that's when Elon's went off, because when it went around the moon on its attempt to pick up speed, it like went off at the wrong angle and didn't actually hit Mars.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
And that's where it was like, yeah, unpowered, you can do that type of thing if you get it the proper trajectory, or the power doesn't have to come at the orbit point.
How many years of delayed attempted launches to get people to Mars do you think will happen before the public gets frustrated and loses interest?
Man, I feel like they're already starting to lose interest.
I think people who are
so maybe like
aren't interested.
10 more years.
10?
Yeah, I think like 10 more years.
I wonder how many years of moon mining or moon operations will have to commence before people get like cancer and get real sick and all that shit, before they give up on like anything off world, essentially. Because we don't have, like we were talking about earlier, we don't have shields. And I don't think it's realistic to expect people who are working on the surface of the moon to walk around in a lead suit. Like the energy requirements necessary for a bionic suit to move a big lead shielded suit. That's just like, actually, you know what? Maybe like reduced moon gravity, it wouldn't be that big of a deal at first until their bones start to deteriorate and their blood starts to attack itself. Because we don't really know, like, we know what happens to a person who's in like on the space station for a year, but we don't know what it's like for people to be on the moon for any period of time. Because nobody's actually been subjected to that environment for that period of time. They've only been on the moon for a few days.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it's, knowing how our body starts to deteriorate, even if they work out. It's like with all of the working out they do and all the maintenance they do, it still deteriorates on the space station over time, to the point where getting back to regular gravity, they have to like learn how to walk again, like long distances, and not learn, retrain themselves to walk over long distances without getting tired. So it's like, yeah, what does long-term inhabitants of the moon do to the body? Because then it's like, does that person just stay there, or do they come back to Earth, or like, do they serve on the moon like term in the military, in the sense of, yeah, if you stay there too long, then your body just starts to deteriorate to the point of not being able to hold itself together or hold itself up.
Yeah, there's like a point of no return where there would be no amount of physical rehabilitation that would be sufficient. At a point, it's a death sentence. It's like a voluntary. It's like slow suicide. What would that?
Right.
There's got to be a word for it. They'd be working themselves to death. My dad asked me, he's like, "What kind of jobs are even available in space?" And I said, "I don't know, geologist, xenobiologist, engineer." No, he said geologist. I said engineer and xenobiologist. He's like, "Yeah, but what kind of life do you think they're actually going to be studying?" And, of course, at the moment, nothing.
I mean, as far as I can tell, life in space is just, or the job in space is surviving.
Yeah.
And it's constantly like
fixing
shit. And then only rarely do they actually get time to explore, because most of the time they're fixing shit from just having to deal with the hostility of existing in space. And that's where it finally dawned on me at one point, like, a ship captain on the sea and a ship captain in space are two completely different types of ship captains, in that the one on the sea does not necessarily have to have intimate knowledge of each working part of the ship, whereas someone in the captain's ship in space, they have to know every part of that ship inside and out, down to, that's why Janeway's constantly doing math, because she has to be capable to be a captain, to like, she has to be able to hang with the chief engineer doing math to be captain. Like, you can't be captain if you can't do math as well as the chief engineer. The captain just has more skills than the chief engineer.
That's why Picard could detect a .03 variance in the warp containment field from the bridge. He could just feel it.
He had an anthropologist professor trying to pull him away from the captain's ship to go on a fucking field study.
Treasure hunt.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the person. That type of person is the only one capable of actually captaining a starship, because they are so dedicated to understanding that they don't actually even have time for personal relationships, because they're so dedicated to learning. That's the only type of person that could actually captain a space vessel in the way that they're being portrayed. In that, I'm sure, somebody who doesn't know the intimate aspects of their ship could captain a vessel. Could they survive for 5 years in space? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Could they survive for 10 years in space? I sincerely doubt it. So that's where the difference between the captain that knows all aspects of their ship being attacked or encountering an asteroid belt or some sort of temporal anomaly, and then being able to fix the ship and get away from that thing in absence of external help or aid. And that's the big difference, I think, with, like, in the sense of, Starfleet, because they have these ships that are effectively self-powering as long as they don't lose their dilithium, and they don't have to, like, eject the warp core or anything. They're basically self-sustaining for up to like 5 or 6 years at a time. And it's like, the issue is making sure that status is functional in the hostile, violent space region that, like, is no longer connected to a planetary security blanket. And that's what I mean, like, and the whole reason I say planetary security blanket is that a planet has fallen into an orbit that's predictable and has a set pattern of movement, so that you can anticipate anything that is going to affect the gravitational field of a ship, so that the hull stays together, down to once that ship is, like, out of orbit, it has a completely different gravitational force, or a lack thereof, that's going to allow it to maneuver in a different way, which is why when those ships take off from the planet, they have to use thrusters. Like, you can't just use your nacelles, like, to necessarily take off from a planet, unless you're a shuttle that's small enough for those things to work at scale. So it's like the technology.
Voyager was designed to land on a planet,
right?
But Voyager's
and that's
tiny.
Where,
which,
like,
Voyager's
Enterprise
still
was
huge.
built. Well, you see, they'll built in a space dock, like, circling a planet most of the time, and that's where a lot of these spacefaring vehicles in this universe were never necessarily meant to land on a planet, because then they're not outfitted to take off from a planetary surface, because they were never actually on a planet surface.
Yeah, like the Kelvin Enterprise was built on Earth on giant pylons that held it upright, but once it takes off, there's no way that it can support itself if it lands. And then when they do eventually crash land it, I mean, obviously the thing just is destroyed, but It still didn't have any way to support its own mass in any way as it crashed into that planet in Star Trek Beyond.
Yeah, it didn't even have a landing.
Like no Enterprise has landing gear, and the fact that like Voyager has landing gear or landing struts, that just communicates how tiny Voyager really is.
Yep.
Like Voyager is so small; it's probably not even as big as the Enterprise D's nacelle. It's tiny. Like, I bet the entire crew of Voyager is like, what is it, like 80 people or something? You know, that's like, it's like
I think it was 80 or 90, right?
something.
Oh no, it says 200.
200. Well, maybe with the Maquis on board, but
Roughly half the size of the Enterprise D.
yeah, I'm not buying it. That thing is so small. It's way too maneuverable, and it can land on a planet. And they show people climbing out of it. It's not nearly as big as that. We've just,
Well, and then you see like Void or on the Enterprise on Next Generation, they'll show people in like shadows of people in the windows. You can see them ever so often, so you're supposed to be able to tell that the window from a deck is like human size. So then you get the scale, and yeah, it's clear that Enterprise is way bigger than Voyager, like in the way they represent it. But
like the bridge of Voyager is so small compared to the Enterprise D bridge. It's
but
like,
I was gonna say, you realize like the Voyager CGI was just done haphazard and not relative to any like real scale, because when they pass over the rings of a planet, like you see the reflection of Voyager in the rings. So then that means the planet is like an extremely tiny planet, or it just fucked up. So that's where it's like there are things in the Voyager intro that are clear indicators that they just threw scale to the wind.
wait, so they flew by some exceptionally massive moon that had rings? That's
basically. Because once somebody pointed it out, I was like, "Oh my god, this is terrible!" Like,
it can't even be that big of a moon either. It's got to be like smaller than our moon. It's got to be like really tiny. I know exactly what scene you're talking about. I never thought about it, but I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yeah, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like, I think it's like halfway through. I'm watching it right now. It's like, a minute and 10 seconds into the.
So,
it's flying over the dust ring, and there's like a reflection of Voyager in the rings, and it like Voyager itself probably takes up a third of the ring.
oh wow! So it's a small ring around a small but exceptionally dense moon. Man.
They just clearly fucked up the scale.
That totally speaks to the reckless behavior of Tom Paris. flying their only ship next to an exceedingly dense but tiny moon. Good job, Tom. Way to go. Way to endanger everyone's lives.
It's really weird. I'm seeing, like, I guess in watching a lot of the Star Trek stuff on like pirate streams, the quality of the video is not HD, and I didn't realize it actually helped it out, because then it covers up all the bad CG where the lighting is just horrible on the CG, the lighting and the shading and the reflection, and it just looks completely CG, whereas when you're watching it on a pirated stream, it like adds these little visual artifacts, so it's not HD, but it looks more realistic. And that's where I'm like.
So in Lower Decks, after the Cerritos is destroyed in the first season, or damaged heavily, and is being rebuilt at the end of the first season, the captain's like, they ask her if she wants it to be like the what was it? They want it to be like the Enterprise. She said, no, I don't want it to look all sovereign-y. And it occurred to me that like in the Star Trek game that I play, I have total control over what the bridge looks like, or the nature of the hallways, or the uniforms, and they can all be individualized. So it means that not only that, but there's like different insignias for different classes of ships and different historic ship names. There's you can get your Constitution badge or anything like that. And so it occurred to me that if that's standard within Star Trek universe, like every starship might actually be different. And if it's up to the captain to make those decisions, if the captain has really poor taste, they might end up with terrible lighting and uniforms that look bad in that lighting, or hallways that are constrictive because they didn't opt for the slightly wider hallways at the expense of storage space in the crew quarters, things like that. Or they were fine with tighter conduits for all of the piping and wiring and isolinear chip matrices and all that stuff. So, it could be that the lighting on Voyager was bad, not because of the set design, but because Janeway just is a very poor interior designer. That could be why the uniforms sucked, because she just went with whatever they were using on Deep Space Nine, because she didn't have.
I thought the ship captain was like given their assignment at like the very last minute. It seemed like, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I'm the captain of the Enterprise. Oh, hello, crew. Nice to meet you. You're my number one. Cool, let's go." I never got the assumption or the impression that the captain had like anything to do with the ships, and like it almost seemed like Starfleet was like, okay, we got all these people and we got this crew. Who's gonna be the captain? Okay.
Well,
no, Kirk's too old. No, he's out. Geordi, no, he's a little too black. No, Janeway, yes, that's what we're gonna make. And then Janeway waltzes in and is like, okay, hello, Voyager crew. Now I'm your captain. And then it's like,
this is your captain speaking.
This is the first time Janeway's ever seen Voyager, but she's completely intimate with the schematics, and she's like, oh, that's where the nacelle is. I always saw it in my mind in a different place. So it's like they're completely intimately connected, but they've never seen it until today. And that's like, even in the Star Trek movie with Kirk getting the new Enterprise, it's like it was.
I can see Kirk not knowing anything about his ship, because that's like very Kirk-like to just kind of wing it and get it right the first time because of sheer luck.
But then the way that he's like smirking, he's like, I'm going to destroy this ship. And it's like, this isn't the original Enterprise. So going in, he's just got this like death wish for the ship. And it's like, this is not the original Enterprise. So it's going down, and I'm not going down with the ship, but because we need a sequel. And there's like the way that he's just there's a smugness he takes sitting in the captain, like when they're handing over the captain's chair. It's like it's notable.
It's
and
the
that's
face
like,
of somebody who knows that they shouldn't be there.
Yes. He's like, I know I'm too old to be in this captain's chair, and I'm a little too overweight, but here we are, and I'm about to go on this adventure yet again. And it's very much like Shatner is like, he's not breaking, but he knows he's a little past his prime, but he's still Kirk.
Yeah, that whole.
'Cause he's got that same smugness in Generations.
Yeah. That's the Kirk charm, though.
Yeah.
He was a charmer. He charmed everyone. That's how he got his job. It wasn't because he was actually like the best at what he did. He was just the best person for the job at the time. And then they retcon it to make it seem like he's some rebel that gets the job haphazardly because the captain gets murdered. Yeah, let's give it to the guy that like almost got kicked out of the academy. None of that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like he's like it's like Archer. He's like a savant. He's definitely an idiot, but he's so intuitive that he can just do everything. Maybe that's the magic of a certain type of captain, because I feel like Riker taps into that too, like the power of sheer bravado.
Well, and even the Kobayashi Maru is meant to show that. It's like this captain is an unorthodox, outside the box thinker that gets things done because he doesn't take the orthodox Starfleet rule approach. It's like, yeah, guess what? Him rewriting the rules to the game is why he became a legend, and it didn't cause him to fail. And that's like the aspect of Kirk that the audience is supposed to latch on to, which is where Picard and then Janeway and then Cisco even have their own different aspects about them, where it's like Cisco was the most likely captain to punch you in the face.
Oh yeah.
Like, and then even Q alludes to this where he's like, Picard never would have punched me. And then Cisco's like, well, I'm not Picard. Yeah. So there's these little moments like that where you get the aspect of them that makes them unique as a captain. And that's where Kirk's is being unorthodox and not doing the expected. And it's like, that's not the same for all the other captains at all.
Yeah.
And, it seems like they're trying to do like the opposite in Pike. It's like Pike is the anti-Kirk.
I think Pike is the archetypal Starfleet captain. He's really good. He can follow the rules. He knows which rules are bendable or flexible. He knows when to push the rules. He knows when to break them. And he's committed to his mission.
Yeah.
And like Picard, he knows every single function of his ship. He knows how to work on it. He knows how to do the math. But he's also shrewd enough to recognize talent in Kirk. So I always thought that the Pike character went like in the second season of Discovery or whatever, third season of Discovery, the second season. They did a really good job with his character because he kind of grounds the whole, after they reveal Lorca as a bad guy, like here's a character that can bring us back towards or re-identify what a Starfleet captain is. Because for the first, once they reveal that Lorca is Terran, then for a brief moment you almost start to wonder, is like, well, is this a Terran Star Trek universe story? What's actually going on? We haven't seen the Empress. I don't know. I think Discovery is kind of in this weird limbo. It's not quite Star Trek. It's not quite its own thing. It looks like Star Trek and it behaves like Star Trek.
I won't even say it's Star Trek drag because it's not.
No, it's like Star Trek cosplay.
Yeah, I feel like
with way cooler special effects.
Voyager was Star Trek drag.
Yeah. I think DS9 was like the last real Star Trek, episodic Star Trek story that we got.
And Enterprise was Star Trek in cowboy boots.
Enterprise is pre-Federation. All of that story takes place pre-Federation.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' base capsule. RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.